Hi, I'm just going to make a quick video about legislation, a quick bit about legislation, or whatever they're calling it. There's a lot of talk going on. This was particularly having to do with Detroit going bankrupt. And someone said, oh, the thought that legislation can fix today's problems is delusional, magical thinking. And really, it goes both ways. The thought that legislation causes problems is a product of that same delusion, the belief in the state or government, because legislation does nothing, right? Legislation has no mind or body. And that might seem a little bit of a weird example. And a lot of things you can be said about that, right? And a lot of things that people talk about and speak as if they're an entity or if they actually do things or have effects. I mean, some things do have effects, but legislation does nothing, because what is it? It's just a bunch of people writing stuff down in the context of, well, this group gets to command everybody in the general area or whatever. So there's no effect from legislation itself. I could sit here and I could write down a whole bunch of commands, but if nobody believes in my perceived authority, then they're just going to look at me like I'm crazy if I run around trying to say everybody's supposed to obey this. I mean, it's the law, it's legislation, it's whatever. But that's essentially what they're saying. So, there's no effect of legislation. What's happening is people believe in the state and they initiate violence or do force to people who disobey or are caught to be or found to be not in non-compliance with the state or with the commands of the group that they call state, or politicians or government or whatever they're going to call it. They just believe in authority, so they believe in their authority, so they believe that they have the right to command. That is all that's actually happening. Legislation isn't really doing anything. I mean, they can write as many laws as they want, that group of politicians. If nobody believes in their right to impose that, nobody's going to just go silently along with it. It's not strictly the threat of force, because people don't obey every thug just because there's the threat of force. People feel they have a right to defend themselves, and once people give up the belief that the state has the right to command them, or the right to control the territory, or the right to rule or legislate or regulate or tax, or whatever their terms that they're using for that action in reality, which is commanding and doing force for disobedience, simply because they say they have the right to do it. There's no justification for why they're commanding you. It's not just where people are doing force or restitution for murder or damages. They don't even go that deep into it, right? They don't say you should obey the state because all the state's commands are moral. They just say you should obey the state or we're going to do violence to you. So, but that's all that's happening. So this idea that legislation does anything is ridiculous, because it doesn't. It's literally a cult. It's a bunch of people just writing things down and saying, well, these are laws, and everybody in the area is supposed to obey them. I mean, just imagine a group of 100 people, and this is a really basic example, but 100 people living near to each other, and 60 of them or 51 of them or 80 of them decide to pick some guy to tell everyone what to do. We're going to call him the mayor, we're going to call him the state or the leader or whatever. It's just he's going to be initiating force against those other 20 people or whatever, 40, 49, whatever it happens to be. Just a very basic example of rudimentary democracy, which it is pretty basic to understand. It's just the effects of legislation are nothing, because if me writing stuff out on a piece of paper doesn't have an effect on reality, then neither does legislation, because that's all that's really going on. Like I said, what's happening is that people believe in legislation and they believe in the state and they believe that that's law and everybody's supposed to be obeying it. And if you're not, then you're wrong and you need to have violence done to you. You need to be punished, basically. Either threatened with, we're going to take your money, or give us some money, and if you don't, then eventually they'll come up and actually do violence to you. So, the idea that the state or the legislators or the legislation does anything is is nonsense. It's just part of the same delusion that thinks that legislation can fix problems. Because it's not the legislation that's causing the problems. It's the belief that some people have the right to rule and initiate violence on others. That's the fundamental belief. Without that, there is no legislation. It's just people writing down commands. And you can have a sound philosophy based on the concept of self-ownership and individual sovereignty, or however you'd want to put it, which applies to each individual, and then there's no contradictions. I don't have the right to rule you, you don't have the right to rule me, and it just extends that way. But somehow the state writes, if I write commands down in my house and say all my neighbors are supposed to obey it, they're going to be like I'm nuts. But if I pick someone to do that, or 60 out of 100 of us pick someone to do that, or even it doesn't even matter, it could be 20 out of 100 pick them, and it's just everybody believes that that's law, there's going to be some people running around doing violence. The human action is what is causing these issues. People doing violence to others, people using threat of violence and initiation of force to limit opportunity and to keep people in a specific place in the socioeconomic structure, or whatever you want to call that. So it's not legislation. Legislation isn't the problem either way. It's people's belief in the state and in authority, that when those people write something down, everybody's supposed to obey it because they have the right to command, which is authority, the right to command, the right to rule. So it's not the legislation, guys. It's the belief in the state. And if you want to look up more on this, check out any of the stuff that Larkin Rose does. Mark Stevens is pretty good too. Stefan Molyneux. The video "The Chain of Obedience" by Storm Clouds Gathering, that's a pretty good video, which is exactly kind of what I'm talking about here. I mean, it's exactly what I'm talking about here, but it's a really nicely done up video, which makes great arguments. A command is inconsequential if it's ignored. So it's not the legislation. If it were the legislation, you wouldn't even have a choice to disobey it, right? Government's in control or whatever. So, all right, good luck.